It might take people a couple of minutes, given that it was a new link.
I put it on the website as well.
Okay,
so
great, great, so can't go wrong.
Is this addressing the previous link? I
Yeah.
tried to sign into it this morning and it was,
Fine.
Yeah, we just found that at 5:25, it didn't work.
yeah.
Hey, welcome. Our meeting is now in order, and I'm hoping that we will have a few others joining us.
Angela's just joined in, Marcus just.
Great, and I think Margaret as well. Okay. So let's get started. I think we have no members of the public with us as yet, but they will certainly be welcome if they join us a little later. Hi, Angela. So let's just get started with a quick review of the agenda. It was sent out ahead of time about a week ago, and if anyone has anything to add or change, please do that now. I have nothing to add or change. So, okay, the agenda stands as is, and we don't need public comment. We'll jump right into administrative items. Is Margaret with us on?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Hi.
Margaret, welcome. We will actually wait till another meeting so that we can officially welcome you and Pete together, and then we will all introduce ourselves in all the length that we might want to do. But today we're just delighted to have you with us. Margaret has been appointed by the select board. There might be a swearing in or something, right? Yet to be done, but you're all but 100% official, 99%. So welcome. We need you, and we'll schedule an orientation soon. So town staffing updates. What was that all about? It's that you are the director. That's what it would be. From our last meeting to this meeting, Stoning has resigned. Julie is the director. Tom is going to be working, I think, very closely with our process to the extent he can, to the extent that the field will allow him to come and be part of our process. And an assistant planner position has been posted. So there, the 4 positions with the administrative assistant, Irene Dugal, will be completed soon, we hope. And congratulations. Yeah. So the next thing on our agenda is the review and approval, if we approve, of the minutes of our March meeting. Those were sent out with the agenda and whatnot. I hope folks have had a chance to review those. If there's anything to be added, corrected, and just jump right in. Otherwise, I will assume, without taking a vote, that the minutes of the March 13th, 2023 meeting are approved as sent. And Margaret, I will let you know how to find all the documents you could ever want in life.
Thanks. I was just going to ask that. All of a sudden, I can't hear anything.
Oh.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. It just cut out for maybe a minute or two.
Hear me okay now? Great, nodding, I like the nodding, great, great, okay. so, those minutes are approved, and the next item is just to make sure this is on everybody's calendar. We've had some very exciting workshop meetings, and our next workshop, our workshops are once a month on the third Tuesday from 4 to 5 usually. But we've had, one of the consultants, actually both of the consultants, Leslie Oberholzer, working with us very closely on some revisions to make sure that she understands what is wanted with the center of town recode. And those meetings, the next one and the last one have been an hour and a half. We may not need that full hour and a half, but 4 to 5:30. And I just want to do a double check around the room that that's on everybody's calendar and you folks can attend. It would be great if everybody could be there. Tuesday, the 18th, 4 o'clock. And it will be, I think we'll meet in the second floor conference room and remote, so people can do whatever they need in terms of their schedules. Great, love those nods, thank you. Okay. Just to let folks know, my hope coming out of that meeting is that we will have a sense of some initial next steps where we can share the draft of the center of town recode, the form-based code, with stakeholders, and probably do that by a hybrid meeting, but to, begin to invite people who are going to be using that code all the time to give us some feedback. So we'll look forward to that. Okay. Our next big item is recode updates. And joining us for this meeting is our code enforcement officer, Tom Lister. Just to give a little bit of context, and both Julie and Tom correct me if I've got any of this wrong. In the course of some of the staff changes that have taken place, after Rod left, I think Kate and Tom met to go over a lot of the draft code that we now are working with. And based on that, as well as some things since, Tom has sort of identified some things that are sort of in need of change, are sort of little ripe spots, I would call them. And it sounds like this would be a good time to just alert us. And am I right that this is not the center of town, or does it include the whole town? Is it the
Tommy, can you just turn on your speaker? Yeah, you're already muted, but turn on your speaker too.
just put your volume all the way down. Yeah. So am I right? Is the whole of town, does it include the center form-based code?
My list here,
Yeah,
it'd be the current zoning ordinance.
sure, current. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So it sounded like it would be helpful for us to hear some of the things that have risen to the top of the milk jug for attention. And so, we'll give Tom as much time as he needs on the agenda. And if folks have, I'm assuming folks will have questions about this, and we will learn something in terms of the way code enforcement happens and where some of the challenges are with our current code.
Thank you, and please do interrupt and if you have any questions along the way. This is kind of a question and answer period here. My background, I've been a code officer and I was in Falmouth and Wyndham and Topsham here, and over a period of 20 years, I've been with the Maine Building Officials Inspectors Association. We're an organization of around 320 CEOs, fire officials, architects, engineers. And pretty much my whole code career, I've been a member. For 10 years, I've been held director, vice president, president, and back to director position, because it would let me go. And last year I was appointed to the State Technical Building Codes and Standards Boards. That's the board that oversees the implementation of the state building code. That's a 2-year appointment. And I was assigned the chair of the Technical Advisory Committee for the review of the 2021 residential code. So that said, my feeling is none of that really qualifies me to write a zoning ordinance, or because there's a lot more to it. You're involved because you have to recognize portions of town that where population centers are, traffic movements and all that. I think my role is, I'll quote a planner that I worked with one time. His role was to write the ordinance, and mine was to tell him what it said. With that brings me to any zoning ordinance. Should have a clear and precise, actually, I could read this. Clear and precise language.
You can also share your screen if you want.
Yeah, let me go back to that.
And can folks in Zoom land hear fine? Great. Goodness.
Okay, keep this in the back of your mind whenever you're writing the ordinance. If an ordinance is vague, ambiguous, or indefinite, so that it's impossible to determine what the ordinance requires or to determine the legislative intent, the courts will hold the ordinance void. The meaning of an ordinance must be clear enough so that persons who are subject to its provisions, which are all of you, everybody who lives here, can determine what acts will violate it. And a penal ordinance, which is what we have under the proposed penalty for violations, will be strictly construed by a court in favor of the defendant. That just means that there's a coin toss, I usually decide in your favor. So the clearer it is, the better it is from my point. That doesn't work out in all cases. With that, I made a list, and I'm gonna have to probably bounce around here. I've got a big version for me, and little versions for anyone else if you'd like one. And
Oh, do you have copies?
I do.
That would
Yeah.
be great. Thank you so much.
And they're not real specific. A lot of them are just gonna start a conversation.
Yeah.
That was my intent. So in general, so what the left-hand column, everything is, the zoning ordinance is 225 dash something. So these are all the dash somethings, the 6 and the 14, the 17. So in the definitions, which is probably the most important part of the ordinance to get right. It's in general comment, and there's several definitions that may have the same meaning. I just listed a few. We have dwelling, single family, dwelling, multifamily, dwelling, two family in the ordinance. But we also have residential dwelling unit. And we have manufactured housing and manufactured housing unit. There are duplications, so that's just something we need to look at. And Kirk may be looking at that. We're gonna have a meeting with him Thursday.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shoreline definitions, this is one we'll move down the road. We're probably gonna be changing our shoreline to update it with the current state standards. And personally, I think it would be best, there's a lot of shoreline definitions specific to that ordinance section that should be in that section instead of the general section, because when they're in the general section where they are now, they apply to every use, whether they're a shoreline use or not. And in some cases, that's kind of it. It's been confusing. And it just clutters the definition section that way. Folks, whenever you see a C handout, a lot of times when there's questions, I'll post some handouts with it. I'll just give you an example. I won't get into detail. So that one was a lot lines and things like that. So there you go. Had a lot of questions from surveyors and people, just what everything meant. This is one we're gonna have to spend some time with. Frontage, lot lines, what's the rear line, what's the front line, what's the side line? It sounds pretty simple, but wording means a lot, and a lot of these have different, they have maybe street, they have right of way, some have right of way, some have street. It's not very consistent. There's been a lot of confusion over that. We have a backlot piece, which is by itself, in which case it wouldn't necessarily have a front or side line or a back line. It's just a back line. Things like this. Anytime you see a handout that I refer to, or if you go on there, you see the asterisks and bold, those are my commentary. So that's what it is. There's a few over here. But get into that later. So that's the that was the comment up here, C handout. So we'll probably go over that in return. Then this is examples of terms that are defined, but they're not in our use table. Probably don't need to be, but then again, we would need to define it, take that out, clean it up. There are other issues where we have a use in the table that has no definition, so that should be defined. I think anything that ends up in our use table should have a definition to go with. Either that or it's up to me, and which could mean up to the ZBA or the courts. It's not fair to the applicant in a lot of cases. We have this comment here, private roads. That's something that's left over in the ordinance after we had a street section that was redone. But it left that in, so you can build these private roads outside of the standards that are in the street section. Some other comments. And if any of you go through this and look and have wanted to email me what does this mean? Feel free. I don't need to go through everything.
If I understand,
Yeah,
correctly,
go ahead.
everything in that second column is how it's written in the current code.
Current code.
Okay.
Yep. Setbacks, we just went over that. Oh, setback, yeah. It just refers to a regulated improvement. So there's an example of what's a regulated improvement. We should probably define that. That's an important. The signs, if you go through the definitions, you'll see sign, comma, and several types. That might be one that we could move to the sign section rather than cluttering up the definitions. Here's one. This is a grammar one. We're not sure. We have warehousing, semicolon, storage, comma, distribution. So with that kind of punctuation, what does that really mean? It's meant a lot of things. Yeah. You could want to clean some things like that up. These other 14 is our non-conforming section. This one I've got a handout on as well, but over the years, well, zoning ordinance in general, there were two types. There was a type that you could do everything unless the zoning ordinance said you couldn't. And the other type was you couldn't do anything unless the zoning ordinance told you could. Nobody has either. But most of the state was based off of you can't do it unless the ordinance told you could. That's certainly not 100%, but non-conformity is the idea was to weed them out over time. The early zoning orders were very strict on that. But probably from pushback that evolved into some cases are not so much. So we have almost our non-conforming section is almost perpetual here. You can rebuild and by rebuilding, we can expand and change as long as you maintain whatever it is non-conforming we have. But in the leftover, when we go, if we had this, if you remove it, a willful act. And that term there has been a debate of what that means for a long time. But just our non-conforming, I guess the question is, does the town want non-conformities to go away? You want to tolerate them as is?
Gotta talk to Kirk
Yep.
and the planning board. I mean, all of this, all of the new draft is gonna end up with the planning board
Right,
in small
in
pieces.
small pieces. So that-
Every
the
meeting.
non-conforming one is a big one and it's hard to tackle.
Isn't the non-conforming issue one that consumes a lot of time for the planning board? In other
The
words,
planning board hears it too often. It probably doesn't get too much past me. However, if it's not interpreted consistently, say you're a neighbor, you think I read it wrong, then you could have grounds to appeal for sure.
right, yeah,
And that puts the applicant at risk of investing in something they may be overturned.
yeah.
So it's good to get it right. That's kind of where all this is going.
And at what point does having too loose a non-conforming clause or part of the zoning result in spot zoning, kind of negating the whole purpose
Of zoning,
yeah.
right, so we have neighborhoods where I'll use the heights. I think almost all the lots don't meet the minimum lot size down. Well, there was an established area in town. And the ordinance was amended at one point, or came into effect, I'm not sure which, but it said, we don't want these lots this size anymore. And that happens with areas where there might be an established setback even. And the setback changes. So either for whatever reason, that's how non-conformities happen. Most of them, most things were before the latest revision, of the late '80s. So anything prior to that may not meet lot size or setbacks. Some of it's use. Use seems to evolve out. That's another, what you do with land and buildings.
Mhm.
That time usually can take care of that. It's the structural part that may or may not get dealt with.
Thank you.
I'll skip around, but I don't want to take too much time here. Just, like I said, so 17 is our general section. Just the comments, and again, I think we'll go over there when we get into the nuts and bolts. There's a big density is a big one. There's residential density seems to be the only density we have. Commercial density we don't have, such as like the mall, but a two-family or a multi-family would be a minimum size based on number of residential units. So there was a big focus on residential units at one time. Whether that carries through with this ordinance is something for discussion. Here's just a mistake. We have these limitations. That's D5 here. Yeah. Requires connection to public sewer and water in several of the zones that are listed in that section. And at any time, if it helps, I can go to the ordinance section if you'd like to see it and have it up. But several of the zones listed don't have sewer and may never have it according to the sewer district. And some don't have water. So this is an allowance for a set, size reductions if you have sewer and water allowance to do that use. And we don't have the provisions for things like that. Some of these are just minor clerical. Oh, the historic district, we have a historic resource survey inventory. That key, I don't think that data is all in the ordinance. It should be probably fit in there somewhere.
This is a new thing. So we're looking at 18
18,
in
yeah.
the section.
Yeah, it's just a list of what is their designation as significant or non-significant, yeah. And that should probably be put in the ordinance, we can fit it. Yeah. Yeah. 19 is our shoreline zoning ordinance, so we've already talked about, we have a boilerplate that the state prepares. And we can make amendments to that, and DEP will have to reapprove that. But that's just an update, so, it used to be you had to update it to the state current language, and we're a few years behind it. But that we'll get that into the repeal. And that was where the definitions I talked about earlier will go. Let's see. Yeah, so this is, so these are our 21 and 22 through 41.1 are performance standards. Those are, bear with me, I've got a lot of tabs open right now. Okay, this is the zoning ordinance, and then we have the districts. General performance standards, these are things, air emissions, erosion control, lighting, floodplain management. Floodplain is actually an ordinance. I'm sure why it's in there. Parking, traffic, things like that. In go back, we had a question on waivers and standards. And our attorney mentioned that many of these aren't traditional zoning standards. Zoning is pretty to the point. It's almost a black and white. These are performance standards that they don't relate to a particular zone or use, as she pointed out in the challenge. And a lot of these are already existing in site plan when a project comes in. Not to use exact, if site plan has its own standards like that the applicant has to address. So that's something to look at too. Some of these standards aren't really traditional zoning standards. And what that does here, say someone comes in and needs a variance for something. You can't make everything perfect. Don't knock yourself out trying to do that. So when something doesn't align, you gotta get a variance on that, whatever it means. The zoning board is limited on what they can grant variance for. Variance is limited by the Board of Appeals dimensional standards, such as lot area, coverage, or setback. That's traditional. I think everyone's probably familiar with that. They can't grant a variance on any of those, almost any of those performance standards. We had one was a sign, believe it or not, that was in the performance standards. As far as lighting it, they couldn't grant it, they couldn't even hear the variance appeal on that. So that applicant would have to go directly to court because of that. So anything else would be under that as well. So the board's limited on what it can hear for variance appeals.
And Tom, is this the planning board or the Board of Appeals?
Board of Appeals.
Okay.
Yeah, Board of Appeals, whenever you have a zoning ordinance, that's why you need a Board of Appeals, right? Yeah. And one of their functions is to, say you have a lot, or if you have a project that just cannot fit it, because again, you can't anticipate everything. The board has some very limited leeway in granting a variance. It's very limited. But they do have it. But again, for this, a lot of those standards I just looked at here, 22 through 41 to 21, they really couldn't hear any of those as far as appeals. Then in those standards, other notes. This is one I'd like to add. So this, we get to So the performance standards implied applicable. Somebody made a note. Following standards apply to all uses, both fish, so applies to everything. Way this is written applies to you, your home as well. Most of these standards, when you read through them, they're there to protect a residential use or the town from a commercial project or use. In Bath where I live, they did this. They just added the following standards apply to, they inserted new and expanded commercial uses. And I think that would fit. We can all look at that and decide, but it seems like that would be a better fit for those standards.
So to create some parameters around that.
Yeah, when you read, if you read through them sometime, you'll see that they're there for the protection of mostly the residential. Yeah, and they wouldn't apply to the residential side. That was all them. Let's see. Oh, we have some leftovers. So over the years that the ordinance has been amended and amended and amended. That's why we're right for a recode. There's some, this section 43, it was called the clustering provision, clustering standards. And it was, now I believe it's open space. The ordinance, there's still sections in the ordinance refer to these clustering standards. That just need to be taken out, like our use rate regulations do. Yeah, cluster development provisions of the hub. Well, that doesn't exist anymore, unless you can read in it that you'd have to kind of come up with an idea that the clustering provisions do apply in here, but they're not. The section was changed and there's some leftover notes.
Leftover
That's all.
stuff.
So we gotta just think of some leftover notes. I highlighted.
So here, just an overarching question then.
Yeah.
We're going through this, so. With the premise of going through this RICO with the consultants was the two pieces, and now we're talking about what was the code cleanup piece of it. And, you know, the intention, we weren't rewriting the code, just cleaning up the inconsistencies, reorganizing for use and addressing some of these very, you know, specific
Right.
contradictions and clarities. So, here's my point is, everything you're talking about here now, has this been conveyed to current consultants? Or how is that being conveyed as Kurt is developing? You said, well, Kurt may be addressing this, but I don't know.
I think we're gonna start this Thursday.
Okay,
So,
that's,
and it's been hard, he's been putting it together in sections. And this is really addressing it as a whole, because some of these bounce around, they bounce from one's definitions, there's one that may tie in with the performance standard, which may tie into his own. So it really has to be looked at as a whole. I think Kirk has been his reformat. I think it's helped a lot. And as far as what it says, I'm not really getting into that. That's your job.
I think Kate may have conveyed some of these changes to him because I know some of them have.
Some of them may have happened, yeah.
and I guess that, that was my question. My understanding is, as Kurt was going through this, he was gonna develop a roadmap, crosswalk, ladder, I've heard different terms used, but
Yeah.
basically a comparison of the codes that were in the existing, how do they appear in the new? And then I guess the question that would be going through each
Yeah,
of
I think
these
he's
comments
found
and
some
saying,
little
okay,
things on his own, but he hasn't seen this.
yeah, he is not, that's all I want to go.
Yeah.
So he has not seen this yet, but
Yeah, and some of this might get into like chapter 34, is this working? That was,
right. So, I guess I think what I'm wondering is basically on this list is there a way to highlight what is either a new or a change, or like saying, hey, this is something that maybe isn't working out, or you know, rather
Yeah.
than, you know, is there anything that deviates from the premise of we're keeping the code as it is, just restructuring it
Restructuring,
and
sure.
cleaning up these contradictions, so.
Yep.
The question is, okay, now buried in here somewhere, is there stuff that's like, you know, this is a change we need to make.
I can highlight that, like this one, focused on, so residential density, that would be my comment there.
So which one? We've already looked at.
We've already looked back, yeah,
Yeah.
so I can go through this as far as policy changes. A lot of these are just, I won't call them
Administrative.
or, yeah, they're just
Clerical.
more clerical stuff. The policy, the focus on density. Is this needed? So this section here, that was one, whatever it is, I can look it up, but that's a policy. Is this working? So I can go through like that and we can discuss, we can bring that up to Kirk, see where we put these. But that's more gonna be more of a decision. For the board, the planning board, we can chime in on some of this. This one here is our.
My sense
stormwater.
of what we're hearing is a lot of it is examples of why the current code needs to clean up and an update.
It needs a
And-
reformatting and
Yeah.
and it needs some of the sections gone. This section here, is this legal, this is our elderly housing section.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And he's taken a look at all of it, not based on any experience and use like you have. You've been bumping up against this for quite a few years, and so your experience is valuable and it highlights a number of things. My assumption is that Kirk has run into a number of these,
Mhm.
and some of them might be things that will be new. So the process, the next item on the agenda is actually gonna look at a slight shift in the way the process is gonna move forward.
Yeah, and I think that's where this all comes in.
Yeah,
So.
yeah.
Rather than go on, unless you want to have any questions, that's really what this is. This is once we get a working draft, and we can sit down and look at it.
Yeah.
And see how it compares to some of this.
And quite a few chapters of the draft have been circulated to all of us. It's been a document that's gone to the planning board, to all of CPIC and all of the planning department staff. So that, and, you know, interesting to hear you say, Tom, that one of the most important things to get right is the definitions. Because this was, you know, as a layperson, I thought, what am I gonna read first? To make no sense at all. I went to the definitions and I started there. And that helped me to go back and read those chapters. You know, and this is exactly why this aspect of the code, rather than the center of town form-based code, is gonna sit with the planning board.
Yeah.
As a process, because, and you and Julie being part of that, you know, will help the planning board look at the brand new stuff, the new draft with the crosswalk, and be able to look at the reasons why that code needs to be changed, and is everything that needs to be done in that new draft. I think the chapters are very close to done, but we'll hear more about that.
Yeah.
On Thursday. I would love to hear, you know, not to, because we've made time in the agenda. And one of the things is if there's anything on the list that does venture into what you described as a policy change rather than, or a zoning change, rather than simply clean up.
Sure.
Update. If any of these things venture into that, that's an important item, to just for us to note.
Yeah. Yeah, and several do.
Yeah.
Most don't, which is good.
Yeah, yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I can point those out. just make, I guess, highlight that in the same list, if that helps.
Yeah,
So I'm not sure.
well, yeah, I mean, as we go down on this list, just draw our, yeah, okay, Jen, so that's, yeah, great.
Yeah, and some of these are removed. I'd have to go see the section again before. 5C. You stop me if you don't want me to go there now. Let's see.
So, yeah, that's kind of an interesting one, because the whole idea of stop putting up parking lots.
Oh, the restaurant parking lot.
Yeah,
55C.
and do you have one of these, right? Yeah,
Yeah. One where you couldn't have a parking lot in front of a restaurant.
so it sounds like in a sense, that's an example of potential spot zoning, because you would really want to, if the restaurant is no longer,
Yeah. 56. So what I'll do for you is just go down and make a separate list of policy. Because the rest you're
Or just
probably
do
not
highlight.
interested in, the planning board would be interested in that.
yeah, yeah. And to be honest, it's not that we're not interested, it's just that it kind of goes a little bit over our heads.
Sure.
Because, for the very reason that we're not familiar with the existing code, but what this has done by taking some time on our agenda, it's really illustrated, the need for doing the project in the way we decided to do it. It's do the entire land use ordinance. To review all of that at once, rather than continue in a piecemeal fashion, even with the big piece of the center of town, do the whole code.
Yeah, so that actually is helpful. So CPIC would be the policy per se, or the planning board would be involved, or not involved?
Everything stops with the planning board, but the thing about CPIC's role is to sort of highlight if something in the comprehensive plan points to the need for, the possible need for a zoning change, CPIC would have a role there in terms of simply advocating for that, talking about how, the plan has either pointed to that or made that clear. But we know that, we were not wanting to bite off more than we could all at one time, and that this is a really large scope as it is.
Sure.
So the changes in zoning are pretty much confined to that center of town growth area, knowing that at a later time, some actual zoning changes will be likely, but it probably will be easier to do, I'm hoping, once the code has as a whole been reorganized, cleaned up, updated.
Maybe as an example of the tensions between a couple of the different things in the comprehensive plan, and we talked about what happened last week with that recreation impact fee and the new apartments and stuff. That
Oh, yeah.
would be an interesting thing for the group to hear, I think.
The what now?
The apartments at the,
Oh,
that are gonna be subject to a recreation impact
Yeah.
fee, which makes them less affordable because it raises the cost.
Right. So they were unaware that that was going to apply to them because it's a mixed use development. I think that's why they assumed that it wouldn't, but there's a fee, an in lieu fee if you're not providing open space. And it's determined per unit.
Mm,
They have 80 units.
Uh-huh.
So the fee is quite hefty, in comparison to other fees that have been levied. And it came as a surprise to them.
And this is open space, if there's open space available on the lot, but you would make your plan based on the size of the lot. Huh. This is interesting.
And so with
How would
that,
that be addressed? I mean, I understand that right now you,
So the
There's
planning
certain
board, the way the ordinance is written, they can request a waiver, on the basis of hardship, basically. And the planning board will have to take whatever they say into consideration. And they're providing housing that the town needs, a form of housing that the town needs and doesn't have. So
that's sticky
Yeah.
because that, potentially could set a precedent for
exactly.
upper level housing coming in and saying, well, look, you let this housing development not have open space. So we get that same pass also.
Mhm.
Wow.
here's another minor one, same developer, different lot. This would be a policy change, so in some zones we have, most zones, everyone's familiar with a minimum setback, can't be any closer to your property line, X. In some zones, we have a maximum, can't be any further away from your property line, in X. So in the zone we're in, we have a maximum setback of 25 feet. Didn't seem to anticipate a deep lot where you might have multiple buildings on it. So that setback applies to our vacant lot across the street where the same developer wants to do or some storefront with multifamily over it, but then some buildings in behind. It would not meet the maximum setback. So the only way to develop that is gonna be a change here or some. So just looking at it a little bit more.
So it would have to be based, there would have to be a definition that allowed multiple buildings on the same lot to address that.
It'd be whatever this maximum setback was to do, whether it was to create a main street, which maybe does. At a certain point, would it not apply to buildings? It's gonna be a big discussion. I
Yeah.
understand it was a big discussion when it was imposed.
But and you're saying that the new draft code gives a 25-foot maximum setback,
No, I'm saying the current
The
code.
current code,
The current code.
which I think is a big change. The new draft code for the center of town,
Also has a 25-foot maximum.
I think it approaches things quite differently. It's sort of instead of a maximum, it's a minimum, I think.
Most everything is a minimum. Yeah.
And there's some flexibility, because I mean, there is obviously there's traffic going by there.
Mhm.
And so you want to maintain safety, but there are some options. And some of those options were discussed even at that sketch, very rough sketch stage. So
So this would be a big, if there's any change to this, it would be a considered policy change. for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, and that is the center of town, so that's part of what we've been looking at, and it's helpful to sort of see where, because we're looking at the new code, and that's where we've been focused, not in terms of how does that compare with the old code. We've not always had that.
Yeah.
The experience in the room at all of those stages. So if there's anything else on this, it's very helpful to have this list. Does anything else pop out for you, Tom, in terms of,
Not really. I think the direction I'll go with now is to separate this up into the policy versus.
clean up? Yep, great. So thank you. And I think after there is, so just moving on now, to our next agenda item here under recode updates. the update on consultant process with the planning board. We had developed at the request of the planning board chair with us, we had developed one way forward. And that was at the point where Kirk presented in some detail, I think at the second planning board meeting of the month, Kirk presented the draft of many chapters that he had done so far. And there was a really meaty discussion there. But what happened following that meeting is there was a request for a slightly different process, which is instead of the second meeting of the month, having a real workshop around these chapters, to have pieces of it taken up every meeting. And I don't know if Julie, I think you and Tom are gonna kind of take the lead a little bit in that. CPIC is simply an interested observer in all of this, because we're not, familiar with the current code, and want to be as helpful to the planning board as we can, but obviously it has to work for them. And our hope is that it works in a, according to a schedule that's going to get us to our ultimate goal by May 2024. Do you want to describe a little bit more sort of how that?
Yes, so they weren't really excited by the format of having Kirk just come and present to them. They didn't receive anything in advance from Kirk except for the articles 3 through 7. They never got a summary of the changes, and so they didn't really know what to expect, I guess. So going forward, they said they would rather have smaller pieces, more bite-sized pieces, I guess, presented to them, an article or 2 at a time, with a summary, executive summary that describes the changes, so they can sit and discuss them, and Kirk doesn't need to be there for that. We can just help us as staff, right, walk them through it.
So the question really is going to become, what are those chunks? And, Kirk has provided the crosswalk. He said he's nearly finished with, I think he said 90 or 95% finished drafting all of the chapters. So his work is largely done. And he will be available, I think, to work with the two of you to draft that executive memo in terms of helping the planning board engage and give the feedback that they need to give, so that we come out with a code that's ready for community review and that the planning board is comfortable with. Does that make sense to everybody who's listening? Yes. Okay, so we've got a process all agreed on, and we're going to be delving into that. I'm going to be sitting in on Thursday afternoon with staff to meet with the consultants to kind of map some of this out. And, I'll report back to the committee with any big news in terms of a shift from what we've just described, but it sounds like we're aligned now, and that there will be something on every planning board agenda that will move the new code cleanup update forward.
Good.
Yeah. So the next little bullet is milestone schedule discussion. No idea what I meant by that.
Okay, as we were drafting up the agenda, that had to do exactly what she just said, was that if the idea was presenting material to the planning board at the first one, and then having meaningful discussion at the second one, is switching to even smaller size chunks to review is how does that realistically align with an overall
Calendar,
end date? Yeah.
yeah.
And if you're doing smaller chunks, how do those, what is the kind of a milestone schedule? What chunks are being presented in what sort of time frame, and how long does that process realistically take?
I imagine whoever is responsible for divvying up those chunks needs to look at the schedule at the same time. So
Right.
I don't know who that person is. Is that Kirk?
Well, it's gonna be Kirk and with Julie and Tom. And my hope, and I don't know if this is true, but I think just like we did, all of us struggled like mad with the form-based code. When we first got those drafts, it was, brain ache, from here to eternity. But gradually, we learned. Now, I don't expect that to be the process with the planning board, but my hope is that the smaller chunks over time will get bigger because the crosswalk process and what Kirk is doing will become more evident, and this is a funny word, but the trust will be built up that he knows what he's doing. And that the planning board process will move at a greater pace as we move along. Who knows if that's true, but that's my hope. I think in the beginning, there's gonna be, because things are gonna be very different. But I think with the help of the two of you, I think we'll see how it goes.
I think the chunks may vary too by each meeting, because Don chair was really clear. He wanted to have an executive summary that explained what the issues were.
Yeah.
So it could be that there were two chapters don't really have too many issues other than Tom's cleanup things. So that could be a bigger section than one that has, say, the policy question is, do we use recreational impact fee? Do we apply them to apartments?
Yeah.
Because if you're trying to maximize the use of a lot, it doesn't make sense to be having a massive impact fee or something.
Yeah.
So things like that, then it probably would be a smaller chunk of the meeting because it's a bigger policy discussion. So they'll kind of adjust on the fly as it goes.
Right, so thank you for that. If anybody has the time to watch, the planning board meeting on, I think it was March 23rd, was recorded. I think, Andy, you had to miss that because you were traveling for work. Kirk did that presentation. There was quite a good discussion. There was some serious engagement around conditional use. And it's clear that there's going to be some, it's needed, but there's going to be some compromise and there's going to be some clear, and I think the word was rigorous review of how that gets applied. So there will be changes in that. But so that's just an interesting one to watch and listen to if you have the time. Okay, big breath. Let's move on to community engagement and communication. Let me just look at our time here. Yeah, we've got time, and we do not have with us today, I don't think, Andy Sturgeon, do we?
No,
No, and Andy was going to be giving, I'm not sure what happened to him, but he was going to be giving us an update on TDI strategic planning. So we may actually end the meeting early. But just to sit with community engagement and communication for right now, I was so hoping that our update piece, which turned out quite a bit longer than I intended, but it really does give people who have not been aware, if you're not coming to these meetings or listening to the recordings or reading the minutes, you're not sure of what's been happening, and it gives people who are not aware a real overview. I really appreciate everybody who took the time to read it and weigh in with some suggestions. It really made it a stronger article. Couldn't fit into the April issue, but it sounds like there will be no problem having it in the May issue of the Crier. It will compete with the warrant. But the thing that's going to be interesting is Charlie Crosby has agreed that it would be helpful to have some visual. And we're going to include in there the map of the center of town so that people can sort of, focus their attention on, this is, these are the zones where this new kind of code is going to be applied. So
Good
hopefully,
idea.
yeah, that will catch people's eye. So look for that the end of April, I think. Just sent that in today and hopefully we'll get that confirmed. So the thing I wanted to do, if folks will bear with me, is to see what kind of, we have now with Margaret's joining us and Robin joined not long before, and hopefully next month, Pete Bono will be joining us. We will have a full complement of 9 members on CPIC. So we have more hands to do some of the work. And I'm wondering if, we don't need to make decisions today, but some of the things that are kind of waiting for someone's attention. One of the big things is we've started a frequently asked questions document. I think it would be, whenever there's something really confusing that makes your mind go, it's always helpful to me to have a frequently asked questions document to sort of run through and see if that helps me, add to my knowledge and understanding. We haven't completed that. And I think we haven't completed that because we got sort of bogged down in a number of things and we weren't really confident of how to talk about the new form-based code. So that is a project. And I don't know if it's a one-person project or a little team of 3. But I think that would be an important addition to the town website. If we could get something about recode, frequently asked questions up on the website, I think, people could get pointed to something that would answer their questions. So in a way, I'm looking for volunteers for a little team. One of the things that has worked well before is I've gathered people around me and I've been sort of part of the team and, we've worked things out. One of the things we did is review the entire strategy matrix and pluck out the things that seem to be priorities. And, identify that. So for the liaisons with different departments going forward, people would at least have the added benefit of, okay, this has been highlighted. Let's not let this go. So I'll just, Margaret is with us and not having the benefit of any of these documents. We will give you, access to all of these. We've got a work plan that we approved last meeting, and we have a communication, document that gives lots of options, and how some of this will be carried forward is the question, I think, at this point. And I'm open to any comments or input from anybody at this point. I always hate to fill up space too quickly.
That's an old detective trick. Is you ask the question and you just wait and then pause, and eventually they give it.
Somebody's got to say something. But one of the thoughts I had and I shared with folks at the the March meeting, is, to maybe have a team of 2 people working on what every month could be the tidbit, the little nugget of information that we could share with people. To sort of a bite-sized piece, as it were. And, that's not going to be something likely for one of our brand new members unless the brand new member says, this is what I need to learn about what CPIC is doing. Let's see, and share that, highlight that and share that. I think, one of the things that the library has always done, they send out a mailing every month. They've been a great partner in the whole update process. We can probably use the library for a public engagement process around people looking at and reviewing and commenting on the new code. I'm guessing that they would be willing to give us a little piece of their weekly calendar in their MailChimp to, sort of recode corner or CPIC updates or something to sort of just highlight little nuggets to keep what we're doing in the eye of the community. So that might be, instead of being a liaison to a town department, having that as a work assignment. Just a thought. And I'm also open to these lousy, bloody ideas. We can have new ones.
So do you see, hashing this out at the workshop meeting? I mean,
We
it's a more informal process.
It is a more informal process. We can certainly do that. It's fine, I think, in these meetings, public though they are and recorded though they are, to offer ideas about how we can proceed. The thing about the workshop is, our April workshop is going to be taken up. And I would guess that we'll focus a fair amount in the May workshop on sort of planning a public process, or at least a stakeholder input session or 2. That,
That ought to come first, I think.
yes, yeah, yes.
Yeah.
That before the public process,
Yeah.
but, communication, bits and pieces along the way. Frequently asked questions. It's drafted. I don't know how good is it? Is it? I mean, that would be something for maybe our 2 newest members to look at and see if it makes any sense to you. Does it help you understand what recode is? That's the purpose of it. It's really, what is recode? What's it about? And so I think, that's a discrete piece, and I think it would be a good next step.
Yeah, I would be happy to take a look at the document. Right now I'm feeling like I don't know really much of what's going on. So once I get caught up on all the documents, yeah, I'm happy to take a look at some point. Not sure when you need that.
There's no date involved. It's sort of one of those things where, if somebody comes along and says, well, I've heard about this recode thing, what is it? It would be an easy way for us to refer people to, well, here's some information, and it's in the format of frequently asked questions. Because the other thing that I always use to refer people is on the town website, in the planning section with the comprehensive plan and everything, there is the project direction memo. That gives a lot of good information in some pretty, easy to read language. So that's a good first step as well. That was developed by the consultants. Go ahead, Robin.
Thanks, Susan. It occurs to me that maybe after the article comes out in the Crier, there will be some questions coming into the planning board, and maybe you could keep track of those questions. And then we'll start to see what the frequently asked questions are. You know what I mean? What people are wondering about, and build it off of that rather than starting just speculatively, because we don't really know what people would want to know about it.
As it currently exists, the questions are based on things that have kind of a way of creating a frequently asked questions as opposed to anything that came from the public.
That's right. Yeah, it was really our own, using our own process of educating ourselves. Trying to understand what form-based code is and, sort of taking in the full scope of the project and how do we convey this to town residents? So, yeah, step by step, we will do that. Okay, so where are we? Right, because we still have one more vacancy on our committee. I haven't taken a stab at any sort of new assignments. I don't want to have to go in and shuffle twice. So we'll go in and add Margaret and Margaret's contact information. I'll show you, Margaret, where you can find everyone else's contact information so that the Google Documents folders are updated. But other than that, I think we're done with our agenda. 16 minutes early. Unless anyone has any questions or comments to share. Any thoughts?
I will ask the question, just go back to the question we had about the schedule and kind of said what it was, but who did we decide on is really gonna take charge and look at what that
Of the planning board schedule.
schedule looks like? Yeah.
Tom and I will be meeting with Kirk on Thursday, and Susan and Steve in that meeting too. We'll be having a discussion with him then about how to move forward with that, but I think, it'll mostly be me presenting them with these changes going forward with some assistance from Kirk and
And there's an awareness that I think we actually talked about how we would ideally want to have that process complete by, we sort of vaguely said fall, this coming fall. So that as we go into the fall with warrant development,
Yeah, because to make things ready for May 2024 town meeting, we probably need to be ready to roll something out to the bigger, wider community by September, early October, get their feedback. Then I'm sure there's probably going to be some changes. Because pretty much by February, we need to be kind of locked in because everything has to go to the planning board too. So we probably want to get to them by maybe early January. And they can do their stuff. And then by end of February, things have to be just about ready for the town warrant and stuff.
but when you say get to the planning board by January, that's the planning board's decision to embrace and with a recommend to pass.
Right. Right,
Is
exactly.
our hope.
Yep.
But that's the process, and of course, they will have been working on that meeting by meeting all the way along, yeah. Right, does that answer your question?
That answers my question. It's my concern that is that overly ambitious for what? Is that realistic? So.
Well, we'll find out.
I think a lot may depend on how much the public comment indicates they want things different. There's a lot of rewrites that have to start happening in October. Then we may be too ambitious for this year. But if people are like, yeah, it's looking pretty good, then probably can make it work.
Mark, would you, expect that there will be more time spent trying to get the form-based code, known to people sufficiently to accept it? And it seems like the cleanup, it doesn't sound from what you said, Tom, that there are a large number of policy issues. But with form-based code, that's, in a sense, all about policy. It's a completely new direction.
And I think the idea that Susan's kind of thrown out is that based on what Leslie comes up with, that may be ready to at least roll out to stakeholders in May or June, I think is ready. So I think probably it's almost like two processes that'll merge come September.
Yeah.
So the form-based stuff is starting to kick off, you know, in say May or early June. And the other pieces are getting fed to the planning board. By September, we hopefully have a complete piece that then we can roll out a complete code of everything together that we can roll out publicly and then take the big comments.
And I think, you know, the first summer, before the code was, for the center of town was even drafted. In fact, I don't think the project direction memo had been written. There wasn't that. But over the summer, there were 3 different stakeholder meetings. They were all held virtually because of the pandemic, but there were about 30 stakeholders, developers, property owners, who were invited to those. I envision that process, again, maybe not 3 different meetings, but at least probably a couple of them. And it's not a matter of by invitation only, it's a matter of you are the people who are most going to be affected by this. Please come, and open to anyone else who's very interested. That would be the time for some serious feedback, you know, and to engage. It will be a learning process, and it will be a process for feedback. So my hope is that, I mean, the town meeting this year is very late. It's the 30th of May. It's possible, depending on Leslie Overholtz's schedule, we could do this earlier in May or early June. That's, you know, we'll see how that looks next Tuesday afternoon, after we meet during our meeting with Leslie. That all makes sense? Okay, let's call it a day, folks. Thank you so much, Tom.
Sure.
And, yeah, and see you all on Thursday, most of you.